Thing like an earthquake, fire, flood, almost anything that happens in the world we can look at and say, what is God trying to tell us? I think the only thing we can ever draw for sure from natural disasters, if we try to reflect on them, is just that we ultimately are not in charge of what's going to go on in the world around us. Human beings may have something to do with climate change or other kinds of things that may produce more severe storms, but we're not here to debate that issue. But these things, when they happen, is it because God is now deciding to punish these people and not somebody else? The flooding that's been taking place in Asia, in India, and Nepal, those places that have been flooded so often, in Bangladesh, where much life has been lost and what little property many people had been taken away from them. Is it because they're being punished because they're not Christian, or because they're any greater sinners than anybody else in the world? Jesus even speaks that way in the gospel when the people ask in Luke's gospel if this group of people in Siloam, I think it was Siloam, when this tower fell down and crushed them, were they really the bad sinners, and that's why God punished them this way? I tell my friend, I'm not really sure what it is that God might be saying. But if any of us can draw a lesson from it, that's a good thing. And perhaps what we see is that a lot of people understand in a time of crisis, when there is such devastation, that if they are those who can do for others, they can and they ought to, and they do more often than not. That there is that appeal to that good side of us, to that basic goodness that God has put into us, that is called forth when you just look at anything that's been put on either the internet or on TV, in the papers or whatever, of all these people who've just kind of thrown themselves into rescue and recovery efforts and doing all kinds of things to help other people. Many times not thinking about themselves. In a sense, this is how some people have taken this thing that Jesus says to us in the gospel today about being disciples and making something concrete out of it by the risks that they take, by extending themselves. In a sense, carrying the cross of discipleship, because it's obviously something that can be dangerous. It can be something that, could cost them dearly. People that they help could turn around and end up suing them if something isn't done quite right or whatever. Something can happen to anybody who extends him or herself towards somebody else in a tragedy like this. But hopefully many of those people who are Christian are understanding that what they're doing is not just something strictly humanitarian, but through that humanitarian effort, they're really extending the reign of God. They're really carrying the cross of discipleship. They're trying to put into practice in some way or other all those things that St. Paul outlines in the letter to the Romans today. In fact, we would all do well to reread that letter and examine our consciences accordingly to see how we are overcoming evil with good instead of being overcome by evil ourselves. There's an awful lot of stuff that's going on, but we have to keep coming back to the central call that Jesus has made us his own, and he calls us to carry the cross, to be his disciples. And being a disciple means to be a lifelong learner from the Lord. That we are never finished until God calls us to himself. And even into eternity, we will be instructed, we'll keep learning, we'll keep growing, because love is dynamic, and love will continue, and we will continue to grow into the likeness of the one who has called us and made us his own. But in the meantime here, we're always being reminded that we're disciples. How can I serve rather than be served? How can I give of myself rather than seeking for myself? How can I imitate Christ and carry the cross? What is being demanded of me or asked of me that I can meet, even though it's going to put an extra obligation on me? Make me go maybe in a direction that I don't want to go in. Be with people that I would really rather not be with. But yet, God calls me. God is summoning me to go in this direction. This is the way we enact our discipleship. Because God wants to show us, wants to teach us. Look at Moses in the first lesson today. He's about 40 years old when all this is happening. He had a vague notion of who God was, sort of like Abraham had. A very vague notion of the God of Israel, because even though he was a Hebrew, he had been raised in Pharaoh's household. And so when he has this experience of God calling to him from the bush that's on fire but not being consumed, he doesn't quite know what to make of it. And he really does try to beg off. But God keeps giving him the information that he hasn't asked for, and then gives him more information that he does ask for. You know, who should I tell them is sending me? The God of their ancestors. And that's when God reveals the name. I am that I am, or who I am, or what I am. Nobody's quite sure the best way to translate that Hebrew. But whatever, this is the God who expects those who know him, the God who expects those that he has called into relationship with him, to be willing to be taught, just like Moses was instructed all the way along. Just like St. Paul says in the gospel, in his lesson today, in the second lesson. And as Jesus calls the disciples today, once again, to get it out of their minds that Messiah means great, powerful leader, but rather means humble servant who will be serving all the way to the cross and eventually to the resurrection. That you and I are called all the time, day in and day out, to renew our discipleship. Just like those who are continuing to risk themselves to serve those who are really, truly in dire need from the hurricane, from the resultant storms as it's gone up the East Coast, and in all of those places in the world where others are seeking to relieve the needs of others because of things that have happened to them. Maybe that's what God keeps trying to tell us through disasters, through whatever calamity it might be, that he expects his own to continue to serve in his name, to extend ourselves, to give and not count the cost, knowing that by our imitating of Christ, we come ultimately to the fullness of life. And that Eucharist that we celebrate today is that moment when we will be face to face with the living Lord, who wishes to give himself once again to us through the sacrament, so that we can be better able to give Him through the gift of ourselves.